Welcome to Karma Insights, your go-to source for problem solving and getting work done. I'm Swaye Banigo, a principal consultant with Karma Advisory, a boutique strategy consulting firm that's been shaping the landscape of business and technology since 2012. In today's episode, I'm joined by our founder and director, Krishan Patel, and we're going to discuss the future of grant management technology. So, Christian, just to start off with, can you give us a bit of an overview? What is exactly a grant management system?
Thanks. Yeah, we have worked on this space a bunch over the past, 7, 8 years together. And I would say that when we think of a grant management system, we think of a system that is specifically designed, especially from a workflow perspective, to enable an agency to take advantage of predefined workflows to help administer grants for both from the perspective for citizens seeking support after a disaster, or businesses, or even infrastructure projects related to grants. So that would be like the plain and simple definition. And I would say, though, sometimes we have seen that these terms of grant management, case management, sometimes get a little confusing when actually looking at the landscape of which technology providers to select. But we can get into that a little bit more during our conversation here.
Great. So, you mentioned, these systems, these are used to manage grants, using sometimes, technologies that's, somewhat outdated. What do you think is the biggest innovation happening now, in terms of grant management?
I think, well, I'll tell you what we are seeing. We are seeing that a lot of players are vying for the attention of public sector institutions with regards to grant management systems. That is to say, you have your classic grant management systems that are solely just the company was founded to do grant management. And then you have, let's call them workflow management systems that are marketing their systems to support grant management workflows. And then you have potentially, as I would just refer to them as probably low code as well in that bucket. And then you also have these case management systems, or they were more designed from like a case management perspective, the Salesforces, etc., that also do a similar function, and you can adjust the workflow to create what you need for grant management. But you have all of these players basically saying that they can provide grant management functionality. And I think that the biggest innovation, one of them fairly boring, another really important, I would say. But the first one would be the boring one here is I think everyone's just trying to create some better predefined workflows that make it easier for institutions to leverage the grant management functionality, whereby they don't have to think about all the details. You generally know that there's going to be an intake process, a processing component, and then getting payments out the door, and then audit and compliance. But the big innovation that I'm starting to see in this, and look, we could talk about AI and all of the other things going on in the space, but we'll focus it on nuts and bolts for right now. I think the biggest innovation is trying to make the process smoother for individuals who are applying for a grant, a little simpler. So, for example, when a system is integrated with Experian, such that an agency could easily do identity verification or tax verification or anything that automates some of these functions that used to require a ton of documentation to be uploaded. I think these are the small but huge steps that are being taken to make the experience better for users, but also reduce the amount of case management workload on processing applications.
Right. So I guess the big advantage with bringing in third party applications is you reduce the amount of work that an applicant necessarily has to do. But I guess the flip side to that is I guess you have to be concerned a bit with security there in terms of accessing data through a third party. What data you can hand over to those third parties and getting but making sure that you have the right permissions from whoever's applying to the grant. To make that they are informed that you are also sending their information to a third party. So I guess that is something you have to consider with the integration there.
That is absolutely true. And I think like both of you and I have experienced this quite a bit, is that every every agency has different considerations to make there. Some agencies, they get to manage all of their tech decisions from A to Z, and others might have a centralized IT function within the state or within the city that is really calling the shots there. And when the decision is being made to figure out what solution to go with, all of these things need to be understood at the beginning, so that way the long-term decision, the ideal way that the application could be used is there for the agency. One question I have for you, Sway, on this, because, and I know you've thought about this before, is when you look at a grant management program overall, how would you break up the future state architecture for how to look at grant management administration for an agency and looking at the different components of that overall architecture?
Yes, I mean that's an interesting question. I mean, as you mentioned, we're trying to integrate a lot of different functions in one system. I think you really broke it down into. I guess the first step, of course, is application intake, and then you know from there you move on to case management. But you want to make sure that all the data that you have in the intake portion is readily available in the case management uh, portion of the application. So I think that it's really about integration of all the functions. From there you get into calculating awards and then going on to payment processing, getting funds out to the applicant. So if you can have that all in one solution, you could really make the process seamless. You won't have a duplication of information across multiple systems. So I think it's really all about having data in one centralized place and having your different functions accessing that data. And you can really do that in a variety of ways. Preferably, it's just one application, or you can have multiple applications. But as long as they're all using the same source of data and there's no duplication, that would be the ideal scenario.
Yeah, 100% there. I think that two big decisions really come up there in terms of the architecture of these systems is that, hey, one, let's try to have one system that can do it all. And that's one strategy. And then the other strategy is let's have one system that can do a lot of the important things, but we plan on integrating this system with a lot of other systems to fulfill other functions. So, for example, payment processing. You may or may not want your grant management system to do that because, well, perhaps you have another payment processing system already set up at the agency or at a different agency that you might be able to leverage. Or you have to plan for additional compliance considerations that need to be taken into account that is too complicated to build into your grant management system. And I think that generally what our experience has been on this is that trying to build it all into one technology solution can get very expensive, and it's also putting the agency potentially in a bind where they are completely beholden to one tech solution in the long run. So if I were to say the three big components I think are out there, one is the grant management system, some level of core functionality. I would say there are ancillary systems that are really important to that equation as well. Clearly, finance, compliance, probably some legal components as well to plan for recapture or fraud. And then the other aspect of this that we have been huge proponents of with any of our clients is leveraging low code and internal tools to get additional things done more quickly. So, for example, oftentimes you have to create more nuanced applications or functions for something to get done. And it might not be feasible in the grant management system you procure. And so you have to be ready to integrate with the low code system. So that could be done in the low code system, but it could also be integrated into the grant management system. At the end of the day, this is a balance, though, clearly between the flexibility, but also this desire for simplicity and having all the data in one place. But I think that also gets into this idea of maintaining a data warehouse, having a strong data architecture, and also having data governance. So that way, you're never in the situation where you have multiple sources of truth of data. And when that happens, everyone's life gets a lot more complicated. I'm sure we could spend a whole other episode talking about that. So I'll leave that topic for right now.
Right. And I think, as you mentioned, low code solutions can be really valuable when you want to spin up new features and new functionalities quickly. And I do believe, that is going to play a crucial part in terms of, what kind of options are available in grant management solutions going forward. We're seeing a lot more of these systems offering the end user a lot more ability to customize the system to their needs. I think you see it with Salesforce; they have their own low code platform that they use there. I do think empowering the end users to make their own changes within the system is going to be a big step going forward. But I guess some do it better than others. Really providing the framework so the users can easily make those updates and they don't get overwhelmed and it's not overly complicated. But I do see these systems playing a large part going forward in terms of as grant management solutions evolve.
Yeah, I totally agree there, Sway. I do think, though, you know, one of the challenges that you and I faced once was that the grant management system couldn't handle the complexity of the award calculation. And so we had to build that award calculation outside of the system. And I think that these are the things that when you're procuring a system like this, you have to plan for what are you going to do when things don't go the way you plan. Because the policies can change, they need to be flexible. You do not want the technology forcing you to make certain policy decisions, and that's the last thing any of us want, right? And so I think that when when we look at these systems, we're saying to ourselves always, how do we give the maximum flexibility for the agency to make decisions into the future, but also how do you ensure that you're creating lowest total cost of ownership over these systems? Because oftentimes to do custom development with a predefined grant management system is very expensive with the vendor, right? And the same thing could go with making custom adjustments to the to Salesforce or any other application.
Yes, definitely. I mean, customization, it's always a balance between giving the client exactly what they think that they want and having the system adhere to standard processes. So yes, you have all these options, as technology evolves to make a lot of different customizations, but the downside is, maybe it'll be more difficult to support in the long run after you've made all of these changes. And maybe you now vary from, the original platform as it was developed, and then you're no longer supported in the long term. Yeah.
100% true. 100% true. Yeah, that's a big issue. Sometimes when, there's insistence on customizing things and you get off of the versioning and updates of the application, and oftentimes this isn't a problem, but sometimes it is, right? And once you're off that roadmap of updates, your application can become outdated very, very quickly.
So, looking ahead, I think you touched upon AI and artificial intelligence, and that's coming into play now with grant management. I mean, we're seeing it with ChatGPT. It seems like all of the big IT firms now have, grant management. Well, sorry, they have artificial intelligence, their own platforms out there. I guess, what role do you think AI will potentially play in grant management systems going forward?
Yeah, I think that the low-hanging fruit here for grant management systems is likely on chat-based solutions for answering questions regarding whether someone is eligible for even applying, right? So let's imagine a there's a detailed policy document around a specific grant, right? And you know, the agency would be able to take that and feed that into a model and basically enable users to be able to ask questions against it. Now, there's clearly a lot of safety mechanisms that would need to be put in place in case the answers are incorrect, but it can be a way to allow users to ask questions more quickly regarding the rules and the regulations regarding the application, what documents to submit, this kind of stuff. On the other hand, I think that the big opportunity might also come internally, where case managers would be able to leverage that a bit more quickly for answering questions. So when they get a question, the system would be able to say, based on the policy documentation, here is how we think you could respond to this question from this individual. So my hope would be that, and this is where I see things going, is that it's basically going to speed up or help speed up a lot of the processing components where the questions with regards to policy and need to come into play. On the other side of the equation, I do think though, from a back end administrative perspective, agencies will probably start seeing a lot of the benefits here. When you have a data warehouse or when you have lots of documentation created, that's where agencies would be able to start using AI based or machine learning based reporting and dashboard systems to analyze data to understand what are the applicants that are coming in and have, what are the different questions and reports that one might want to create regarding the applicants that have come in. So I see it a bit on the side of the end users, that are using the application, but then I also see it internally in terms of improving the operations and efficiency for case management and program leadership.
Very true. And I think we've seen it. These policies are very complicated and they change all the time. And I think, one advantage potentially is, if you have a model and you're constantly updating it with changes of policies, in terms of AI, that model can be always kept up to date. If everyone's referring to that, you can have the latest information within that model, and everyone can tap into that. a much easier way to disseminate that throughout the organization.
Totally. I also think, so I want to mention one other thing is that I think this is also the opportunity to reduce time to develop solutions as well. So if you understand what the policies are in advance, then it's straightforward enough to use ChatGPT or Claude or any of these major models to say, hey, what are the high level needs of information we need to gather on an applicant? So then you automatically say, all right, well, these are the fields that we likely need to gather, right? So there are different things to speed up the process to get a system out the door as well for an agency. And I think there needs to be an effort internally within agencies to build that capability to say, how can we leverage these systems to get our solutions out the door a little bit faster?
Definitely. Yes, I think that you know, anytime you can encapsulate what exactly the policy wants to achieve, and using AI you can capture that information. And I think it's also about getting that information right away and not having to go back and then require additional information from the applicant trying to track them down. But if you can think of the second and third level of information you may need right from the beginning, you can really cut down on the rework that you potentially have to do.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Krishan. This has been a great discussion. And thank everyone for joining us today on Karma Insights. I hope you found it very informative. And until next time, thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.